Hello, and welcome to Gaming Like It's 1994 with Andrew Plotkin, the author of Systems Twilight and many other fantastic games. Good to see you, Andy. How's it going?
Good to see you, too. It's going pretty good.
I did a little bit of research. Of course, I played Systems Twilight back in the day, and I had completely forgotten how far back it was that you made it, because the shareware or the non-shareware free version that you have out there now is dated, I want to say 2000. And I was like,
something like that.
He did it 99, 98, 1994. That is incredible. How
we were babies.
We were babies. How did you even write this in 1994? That's my question.
Think C was the I had. Oh man, I should pass around in the show notes my shelf of Macintosh programming books, because the thing about 1994 was that the Apple developer website didn't exist yet. So if you wanted to program, you bought books. Mm-hmm. I think you could also get them on CD-ROM, but I was mostly getting them on paper. And I have this long shelf of Macintosh programming manuals for System 7, which I bought at the Carnegie Mellon bookstore, and that cost a bunch of money.
I remember back then, I'm going to go ahead and launch the app. I remember at the time, people loved, there were these Inside Macintosh books, like an entire...
That's them.
Yeah, wow.
In glorious rainbow color. They're right down there on the shelf. I kept them for nostalgia value. I haven't cracked one open in 25 years.
I don't know if you could hear it, but we just heard the opening note of Systems Twilight, which is this sound. And I don't want to spoil the sounds just yet, but I feel like it's going to become an issue later. So there's a brief introduction. I'm not going to read it. People can read it for themselves, but there's a style of this introduction, and I would call it, the word that attracts me is gnostic or gnomic, almost. It's like, what is this? There's a story, and it's very, it's not really saying, it's not wearing its story on its sleeve, let's say.
Well, it's metaphorical, and of course, I didn't have very many pixels. Like, you just can't fit very much text on the screen at this scale. You can see, by the way, that the screen is displayed in a small window inside the emulator window. Mm-hmm. That's because I really wanted to be compatible with the original Macintosh. Like, this can run on an original, which is like 384 by something.
Right.
Something. It's a not a large screen.
The emulator here is in 640 by 480, and if you're looking at 1024 by 768, it's an even smaller box inside. Yeah, that's true. There's another one of those little sounds, and we have our icons. I want to talk about who these people are. We're not going to play through the entire game tonight, right? We're going to do about, I said, an arbitrary limit of an hour. If we run out of things to talk about, maybe we'll even stop before then. But who these people, things, objects, mysterious things are is important. And if you could talk a little bit at this point just about the graphic design of this. I swear this guy always looks like a shoe to me. He reads like a boot from Yellow Submarine, and this kind of wild-haired icon over here. How did you come up with those? And for that matter, how did you actually draw them?
Well, I mean, I still have the original notes. I think scans of the original notes are linked to my website. I just drew some shapes on paper. I scribbled some shapes that I thought would read well. I wanted them to be abstract. I didn't want them to be humanoid. I didn't want them to have eyes or faces. Mm-hmm. And then there was just an air of, like Kiki Booba, tone to them. Like, one of them is wild and crazy. One of them is mechanical and rectangular and rigid and square. One of them looks like a heart later on, and that's, an intentional reference. But I just the main character, the orange one, who is only ever called you in the story. Mm-hmm. I just wanted an abstract shape that was distinctive without having any particular content to it.
Now, this came out after. You can't talk about Systems Twilight without referencing Cliff Johnston's games, The Fool's Errand, At the Carnival, and 3 and 3 at a minimum. And I don't want to turn this into a Cliff Johnston podcast or a Cliff Johnston video, which would be a great topic for a video, and maybe we'll do it someday. But this must have been after 3 and 3, and I say that because this dialogue, this where your characters are actually talking to each other versus reading a bunch of text, that really was the 3 and 3 style.
Yes.
So was this...
Also, 3 and 3 was the one that was in color, and I was following not the exact style, but the notion of having brightly colored characters on an abstract background, which was vaguely computer-like, but also not very representational.
Yes, and it's an homage, really, to 3. Is that fair to say? What was it about those games beyond, I mean, obviously you love puzzles, but was there anything about the style of those games? And I'm going to, by the way, be occasionally clicking through, which means we'll be hearing more of these mysterious sounds. I'll try to not clobber your voice with them as we go.
I can just make the sounds for you.
Spoilers.
Let's go back to Cliff Johnson.
Yeah.
What was it about them? So I ran into The Fool's Errand probably my freshman year in college, and I was playing it on the cluster computers in Baker 140, and it was just a magical combination of story and environment and implication and symbolism, and like everything worked without being explained. All the puzzles made sense without you having to be given rules or explanations. The puzzles fit into other puzzles. It was a just superbly immersive experience, and I wanted to replicate that. I wanted to have more of that experience.
Now, without regard to, so I know Systems Twilight was not a huge moneymaker. You did eventually release it for free. Presumably you got some postcards and, $20 here or there. But without regard to the money part of it, what kind of, how many people, if you had to guess how many people have played this game over the years, what would you estimate?
So I did make what was my selling? I think the selling price was $20 shareware, right? And I think I got $3,000 or $4,000 out of that over the years. So I got, that many people. Mm-hmm. That was a few, there were a few hundred registered players. And of course, after that, I wasn't keeping track. But it was, I consider it a reasonable hit. Mm-hmm. A lot of people talked about it. A lot of people, I put it out on, I put the shareware version out on Mac software or sharing sites like the University of St. Louis archive was the big one, the InfoMac archive. And, it was a standard. People went around and played it. People were aware of it. It made enough money to buy me a new Macintosh. So that was, that's all I expected out of it. And that was pretty good.
So I'm going to rush ahead here because we're going to spend so much time talking about the puzzles that I do want to talk about the plot as we go here. This was the one thing you kind of led with, the one Haitian voodoo reference that I actually recognized in 1994, 95, which was Le Gava. And he's standing at a gate and he opens the gate. So there's this whole Haitian voodoo world inside a computer. What led you to want to use that as your milieu? Is that the right word?
Well,
mythos, milieu?
Pick a word. So first of all, of course, I was writing this as a young software developer and fantasy fan, and I did some research. I'm not in any way going to claim that this was deep understanding of indigenous folklore or Haitian religion. I was a uneducated, unenlightened white guy, right? I make no claims there. I had read, I'll tell you exactly what inspired it. I had read a fantasy novel by Michael Scott Rohan called Chase the Morning, which also made use of a mix of Haitian and other mythologies. It's a neat story, by the way. It's worth reading if you're into fantasy. And I was just excited by the idea of doing something that wasn't inspired by, Western European Tolkien style
Zeus,
fantasy,
right? Or Greek and Roman gods.
Or
and stuff
Greek
like
and
that.
Roman Mediterranean, all that stuff. There just hadn't been very much use of anything outside of Europe in computer fantasy. And I thought this, it was a neat subject. And so I got some books and I, did some reading in the library and I wrote down some notes. And I changed the names around so it would feel like my own creation inspired by, rather than trying to be a direct use of anything. But that's actually what set me off.
So we've actually now, at this point, gone to the map. So we actually have, I'm actually going to just get to the stream here so that if there are any questions from our viewers, I should be able to field them or two, so that if there are any questions to you. Oh, chat is disabled.
By the way, the map was actually quite a late addition to the game. And you remember in 3 and 3, everything was navigated in menus. There was just a stack of menus across the top with every screen you could go to, and they unlocked one at a time as you went through. And I originally conceived the game as working that way, just everything done through the map, all the navigation done through the menus. And people said, oh, well, in beta testing, this is kind of hard to negotiate. Do you think you could draw a map? And I said, I can probably draw a map. And I pulled out my pirated copy of Adobe Photoshop 1.5.
Pirated? That doesn't sound right. This map, to me, is really one of the innovations of this game. I mean, a map may seem obvious, but Fool's Errand in 3 and 3, that kind of, I'm going to choose from one of the 4 or 5 very Mac standard menus. Was always a little bit, I thought, dry. And I think this adds a lot to it. So we're looking at the forest, the workshop, and the river. Do you have a preference, given limited time, which one we look at first?
You know how long it's been since I played this game? I have no memory of what's where. I really don't.
Well, then I'm just going to pick the forest. I'll probably jump around, because we can move back to the map at any time, I think. Right. So let's
you can... are the menu bar isn't showing the simulator, by the way. Do the menus still allow you to navigate, or did I take that out?
They allow you to go back to the map. You don't see... I'm not... You don't see me... It should say back to map there.
I see the menus, but I don't see the menu bar itself.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Just the way you've got it clipped.
Oh, okay. I apologize for that.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna try and mess with it right now, but the only navigation I think you can do is you can go back to the map. So I'm looking now at, hey, a tree, and we're going to climb the tree. I have to say, if you told me what kind of puzzle a CMU engineering-ish computer science student might come up with, this would be pretty close. So I'm going to click to, I guess, move onto the tree. Boing. There's a lovely boing. So while I navigate this tree, maybe you could talk a little about these sound effects.
I had no sound budget, but I had a microphone. Picked up the microphone, and I went boing, zip, 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 and I made a bunch of noises that way. And then I used them. And that was how the sound. Boing.
And those sounds actually, at some point, you made a sound pack available. And these sounds work very, very well as ringtones, I have to say, or text tones or things like that. All right, so now the first tree was literally just you walk down the tree to the completion node. And we get the second tree here, and we can see that the lines don't appear to go anywhere. So I'm just going to pick one at random, and I walk down, and as soon as I stepped onto that node, the lines change. So do you have is there a expected way that you figured players would explore this space and figure out what that puzzle was or how it worked? And this is a puzzle, by the way, where you can get to a dead end.
Sure.
And then you have to restart the maze.
As I said, I really liked the concept of having a puzzle that you could explore and figure out the rules for yourself. So the characteristic mode of the game is that it always starts with a simple rule and then becomes more complicated as you explore it. And you're always looking at it and thinking, what's the rule twist this time? Like, how has the game shifted? So that's how you have to play it. Like, you try it the first time, and the first one is very simple, and then this one is presented differently. The lines change, and then they continue. The pattern of how they changes itself each time you go through a new puzzle. So I wanted to have that element of having a little bit of a new thinking experience and something new to learn each time.
I should have said this when we started. I apologize for anyone watching. I'm going to spoil the heck out of this game with no guilt. It's over 20 years old at this point. I know that you've always had a difficult relationship with hints, or rather an antagonistic relationship with hints. And I remember that there was one puzzle in this game, which we'll get to. It's in the river section, I believe, that you actually gave an official hint for. Was that because so many people were getting stuck on it?
Yeah.
At this point, let me jump back.
That was the one that I got enough questions on that I thought was worthwhile.
So what happens in the forest is you go through the various mazes, and then you get to a point where, and I thought this was actually rather cruel, you get to a point where there's a puzzle where you're just bashing your head against it, a tree that you bash your head against. And if you click on the U character, he kind of gives a very oblique, maybe you should go somewhere else for a while, because there's something you need. We do have some comments here. I want to read one. Thank you for making Systems Twilight. I first encountered it on one of those shareware CD collections that were everywhere back in the day, and it was by far my favorite game from that collection. I never actually finished it then. Years later, I revisited it and finished it with the help of some of the incredibly comprehensive hint guides someone compiled. No spoilers, but the ending is very clever. But has stymied every attempt I've made in thinking about how you might port it to the web or the phone app. That's a good question. Have you ever thought of bringing this back to a different, a more modern platform?
People have asked that more than once, more than over the years. But I feel like I don't really want to be the person that constantly tries to relive the hit that they made in their 20s. Mm-hmm. It feels kind of creepy. I would rather... The fact that you can still play the game through an emulator, I think, is enough. That's the right experience if you want to go back and experience it. And by the way, I want to mention the hint guide was made by a guy named Weiwa Huang, who is now a well-known person in the puzzle field. Has worked on mystery hunts and so forth. And he did this. I had no idea who he was back in the day. I'm not sure there was anything to know. But he did a comprehensive hint guide and put it up on his website, and I was really, really happy that someone had done that. So thank you. Actually, if you want to talk about the historic continuity of this game, about 5 years ago, 2018, someone dropped me a link and said, "Hey, have you seen this game called Systems Erzily?" And I'm like, "What is that?" And I went and looked, and someone had exactly the same experience as me. They had played Systems Twilight and said, "Wow, that's great. I want to make another game just like that." And they went and did it.
That's fantastic.
Just like I had done to Cliff Johnson's game. So there's actually, it's a multi-generational thing now.
Yeah, there's like a genealogy. You're going to have one of those rock and roll, like bands influenced by Big Star. It's going to be, games influenced by Cliff Johnson, and you're going to be on there. And I'm going to have to look for that game. Is it Windows, I think? I think I remember.
It's Windows. It's open source. I think it may not compile in anything but Windows. It was to some extent a programming exercise in Rust or something. But it's a game, and I have not played the whole thing, I have to admit. But I played some of it, and it is absolutely an homage to my game in the same way that my game is an homage to Cliff Johnson's. And it's great. I just love that happened. I hope this keeps happening every 25 years.
There's going to be someone making one influenced by System Syzygy. So now we're in a map called the data stream, which is in the river section. And you can walk around. You're going to hear a lot of little zoops that you wrote or recorded. And there are gates. And the gates have some sort of mechanism. And this is a very Cliff Johnson text here. Gates says, "A gang of ruffians bars you from crossing here. Har, a weakling," says the leader. "Show us a fist, or we'll have our fun with you, sure." So, fist is in capital letters. The hint here is, somehow we need a fist. So there are these green nodes that look like they change. I happen to know that they change things. And there are these red-blue nodes. There you go. A golden fish is sliding lazily through the water, so we can type FISH, and we can now take it. I think Command T will take it. It did. Good. And I think that's actually up here. No, you don't. There, take word. It is actually on the menu. Okay. And then there's another one. By the side of the river, sand is the word. Okay, so now we have these two words, fish and sand. And we have two gates that we can go to. One wants fist, and one wants hand. And this machine, which is the only one we have access to, trades S's for H's and H's for S's. So we can, I believe, take sand and drop it there. Click go. Our sand is now a hand. We take it back. And we go up to there and drop it in, and now the gate is open. Please recycle your keys. I think that means you're reminding me to not leave it in the gate. What was the concept? So there's all the mechanics here of drawing boxes and gates and sound effects and graphics, but conceptually, you're sitting down with a piece of paper and trying to come up with a set of puzzles that get increasing in difficulty over time, presumably. So, How does that start?
Well, a lot of the puzzles are inspired by classical puzzle designs. One which is inspired by the game set. There is puzzles that are inspired by Sokoban, by other things that are familiar. This one. I think there was a puzzle in Games magazine back when I was a teenager. It wasn't called Escape the Dungeon, but it was something like that. Locate the map, locate the link later, and it had this kind of word transformation. And I thought that was neat, and I thought, hey, I'll write some of those. And I think these puzzles, the river puzzles, are the ones that people remember best about the game. They're the most distinctive solving experience, the one that stands out most from, the general realm of, like, every Sokoban game is, in the same genre. I think these felt like something that was actually different and new. It wasn't all that new because I just told you what the inspiration was, but
these puzzles, I want to say, the other puzzles, many of the other puzzles, and most of the other puzzle games that I remember, put those qualifiers on it. There were right answers and there were wrong answers, and it was usually pretty clear when you were on the wrong track. And this is the one segment that I recall having some nasty, things that looked valid and in fact would actually advance you through the puzzles, but then you could
red herrings.
Could you actually you could get into a dead end and have to completely roll back?
I mean, there's gates that let you delete letters and things. If you delete too many letters, you've screwed up. You have to start over. I didn't make any effort to avoid that. But yeah, I did make some effort to think about red herrings and words that could be transformed in multiple ways, and only some of that was correct.
So the cook has shortened hand to han, which we then change the H into tan, which gets us past the last gate. And this is basically the tutorial level, I think, of this type of puzzle. please recycle your keys. So we're going to go on. And we go to, and now we get a little more plot with another one of these strange shapes. Let's click on them. And their name is Emofo. And is this a character who gives us some memory RAM or something? No, I don't think so. Did you have anyone who was... I'm just curious about this. I can't imagine that anyone would think this way, but I know that when you become kind of internet famous, weird things can happen. Was anyone like mad at you for the game? Were they like, you ripped off Cliff Johnson, or did people appreciate it as the homage that it is?
No, I don't remember anybody ever getting annoyed about it. I was open up front, when I put out the game. The README file says, I'm pretty sure the README file says that it's an homage, or a pastiche, or at least inspired by. Mm-hmm. I didn't expect anyone to be fooled by it. After all, the Cliff Johnson games at that point had just come out. Some of them were still coming out. He was still an active writer.
Right.
I did not make any attempt to reach out to him, but I think I probably got email from him eventually saying, yes, I saw your game, thought it was cool. Or maybe I sent email to him saying, I love your games, etc.
We just had a speaking of internet famous, 4 a.m., the Apple II preservationist just joined. Hello, thanks for joining. I was going to set this up, and I got so kind of... I'm juggling windows here. You could probably see me looking around. I'm not a very experienced streamer. I apologize. About a year ago, I got an Apple II disk drive that was adapted to be able to connect it to a Mac. And I had a few discs that were unlabeled, and I preserved most of them. And most of them were profoundly uninteresting, very embarrassing essays that I wrote in high school. But one of them had this game on it. And it was a game where there were 4 countries and a map of the world, and you assigned a certain number of small, medium, and big nuclear bombs to each country, and then they randomly fell across the world and destroyed the world. And at the bottom of the screen, it said, by, I think it was like Zarf and Mr. A. And you, of course, are Zarf. And you need to understand, Andrew, I got this game when I was 13 years old. I had never met you. And then years later, of course, I'm at CMU, and I had no idea that you were this person. And then like 20, 30 years later, 40 years later, I reached out to you like instantly. I was like, this is not you, right? This is just like Zarf. That's like a name. And you're like, you were kind of annoyed. You're like, yeah, no, actually that was me. What's the story with that game?
Well...
And I'm willing, by the way, to do another stream just for that game. Another time, but
I dare you to. What was the story? Well, of course, we're the same age. I wrote it when I was 13. I thought that the idea... I had played Bill Budge's Pinball Construction Set and games like that on the Apple II. And my friend Dave and I just thought that the idea of making a nuclear war construction set where you destroy the world was really funny.
Right.
And so I wrote it.
This is how you get canceled, is something from from your youth.
Yeah.
Right. You wrote it in assembly language, you told me, right? And you were...
Did I? I don't remember. I must have... No, I have no memory of what I wrote it in. You could look at the disk image and find out. There may have been some assembly language, like screen or text drawing routines. But it was... it was just a silly idea, and I uploaded it through my 1200 baud modem. It was probably... If I had a 1200 baud modem at that point, it might have been 300. And I uploaded it to some pirateware site and said, look, this is the game that I made. I sort of admitted that it was me and sort of pretended that it was a real program.
Right.
And it went around, as all these things do, when there's only 50 people out there with modems. And
I'm shook. I'm legitimately shook that, maybe it says how small the computer nerd community was back in the 1980s. I'm still shocked. Anyway, we're going to save that. We will absolutely talk about it again if I can indulge. But I've switched now. I've left the river area because I want to give people kind of a broad exposure rather than a deep exposure to this game. And I've gone to the workshop area where we have a little creature who I cannot click on right now because I think it's Ogham is his name,
Yes.
right? And we have a board.
You're in puzzle mode.
And we're in puzzle mode. So we're looking at this board, and it's got an A and a B, and the instructions we've got are to route the board. If we pull down, this is a very fool's errand way of giving the instructions. Connect to, so shift click to break a wire, and just dragging to drag one. And again, we start with the tutorial puzzle. This, by the way, I think this might be my favorite puzzle. This one and the puzzle that comes later in the section with the balls and the gates that you can't walk through. I think these two are like my jam.
This is a super familiar puzzle. It's been in, there are 30,000 little point-and-click adventure games that have used this little, fill up a grid with connecting lines puzzle. That's not in any way a new idea.
Well, it's a good implementation of it. So let's see. Now I think that has got to go first, the C, and then the B probably goes here. And we have to leave room for the D wire to slip through.
So I'd start with the D wire, of course. That's just me. You solve it how you like.
Oh, I don't know. And I think we have to get through these to get to the... I think of them as the cloud puzzles where you're putting down interference patterns, which are my least favorite puzzle in the game. So, when I think of Cliff Johnson's games, one of the things that sticks out to me is and I'm trying to choose my words carefully here because, I love the games. I love everything about them. The individual puzzles, there's a very high variance, right? Some of them are pure logic. Some of them are word searches. Some of them, especially in Fool's Errand, there's the screen is flashing and you got to click really fast. And were you mindful of that when you worked on this?
I tried to be. Yeah, it's hard to say. How much of it is me trying to set a more consistent tone for the player? How much of it is me not being as wild and creative as Cliff Johnson was? Of course, he toned it down from game to game. Fool's Errand had the most crazy, wild interface stuff, whereas 3 and 3 had more consistent types of puzzles. But I wish I could think back and tell you that my motivation was to provide a more logical thinking solving experience, but at this stage I felt
people are watching me solve this in real time and critiquing my performance, which is very fast. That's okay.
Yes.
I definitely brute force my way through many of these puzzles. The one in 3 and 3 that particularly killed me because I felt it overstayed its welcome was the mesh puzzles. And in fact, to the point where the 3 even starts making jokes about it, oh God, not another one.
This is the 3x3 grids?
Yes. 3x3 and 4x4 and 5, and eventually it gets to 9x9. And one thing about Systems Twilight is that, with maybe the exception of the river puzzle, which I love it, so it's not a problem for me, they don't overstay their welcome. Each of these sections it's a very, I don't want to say short because that implies it's very economical, I think is the word I would use. And was that a function of time, or was that a conscious design choice?
Well, I mean, it wasn't a matter of time because making puzzle sequences that don't overstay their welcome means that I had to come up with more kinds of puzzles. There's 9 basic puzzle types in the game, or maybe 9 or 10. So that's quite a lot, and I had to implement each of them separately. So it took more time to work that way. Right. Iterating a single puzzle type over and over and over takes more design work, but you're reusing a lot of code. Right. That's sort of the path that games like that Portal and Talos Principle have gone down. Just let's work the hell out of a single puzzle type, and I respect that, but that wasn't what I was doing.
Right.
I wanted variety. I wanted it to feel like anything could be around the corner.
We're at my the puzzle I am worst at, which is this interference pattern one. So we're going to come up to it. Looks tricky. Well, for people like me, it is. So what happens here is it looks like we get 3 at a time in this one. And then if you click such that they overlap, they interfere. And everything here, I think, is very easy on this puzzle, except for this line right here. And this is one where I definitely kind of brute force it. And I want to say that I vaguely remember trying to like push the correct item out to the edge somehow. Like you start in the middle.
Yeah, you definitely have to do that.
And then, yeah, like that kind of thing is going on. But that feels wrong. Oh, this is where I'm gonna context switch to a different puzzle because I'm gonna embarrass myself. I should have looked up the hint guide before beginning this. Let's do the rest of it, and if anyone in the comments wants to tell me what I'm doing wrong with that middle row, I'm happy to listen. And so the rest of it, I think, is fairly straightforward.
I absolutely solve these puzzles when I come across them in games by just kind of banging around and trying to make a mess in the middle and then clean it up and see if I've got the right solution. And if I don't, I bang around and make another mess.
Hold it. We've got almost what we need. So let's see now. I'm doing the crawling out to the edge, and that did it. Oh, thank goodness. That is
this is sort of a generalization of the 3 lights or 9 lights style.
There are 3 lights. Something else about this game that I've always thought a lot about. You hardly ever, even back in 1994, saw games on the Windows side that used the Windows UI. And in this game, yes, we have of course, a game playing area, but you're using standard Mac menus. And that was not unusual. Like most Mac games did that. You have any thoughts about why that is? Why that dichotomy? Is it just Windows is uglier or what?
Yeah, Windows is uglier. No, the fact that the Mac had a system user interface, whereas Windows went down the path of having a per window interface, which were menus within each window that were customized per window, led each game to have its own notion of interface. I think it was just a bias of the system, whereas every Mac menu system was familiar to people because people understood how Mac menus worked.
Right.
And it was also the case that you could play with it. You could put little toys in the menu bar. Fool's Errand had any number of little jokes that were based on the Mac UI, which I loved, of course. Like that was just incredibly entertaining. If you were a power user back then, having like buttons fly off the screen and when you're trying to chase them around with your mouse, which is hilarious.
The fish puzzle in particular.
Yeah, the fish.
I hate that thing. That puzzle feels like a betrayal, a deep betrayal of everything.
It wasn't actually a good puzzle, but it was funny.
All right, so I'm a little bit stuck here in that now we're dropping crosses of 5 squares. And, we actually have a comment here. I'd like to read it. Mr. Radar says, on the Mac UI in games, I think another part of that is that in the early days, this is probably true, the Mac had such limited memory that you were steered towards using the Mac Toolkit UI elements out of ROM to free up memory, and that established a pattern for future games.
I'm sure that was the case. When I was developing this, it wasn't the early days, right? I was using a high-end, for the time, Mac with lots of memory and a color display and so forth. But I did, in the end, try to make it, as I said, compatible with the original Macintoshes, and I tested it on a Mac Plus. The game is compatible with monochrome displays. I was careful about stuff like that.
I feel like I've almost got it here, but I surely don't. All right, well, I'm going to context switch, I think, back to our tree. Let's take a look. So we're 2 through the workshop. We're probably not going to get to these items here tonight. But what I will do is I will probably pick up a Let's Play sometime later after I've had time to think about that one and actually walk through it in more detail. Which of these, between the tree and the river, which one do you think is more interesting for you to talk about?
Well, I would say the tree, just because you'll get through them faster and get on to the next puzzle type. Whereas the river takes probably a little bit more messing around with. It's easier to get stuck.
Well, and the tree, I'm already getting stuck, so that's me. Oh, this one, again, it's one of those where as you move to a node, the closed node opens up. And the open node looks like it does not close. So you go here.
I believe there's an asymmetry. Like the up line changes, but the line going forward and up changes, but the line going forward and down does not, is the trick. Of course, this is a puzzle that's, you can brute force it, right? There's only 2 options at any point, and one of them may well cut off, so you could just kind of bang your way through it.
Well, you say that, but here I am actually rather struggling on it. Let's see. I know I've done this one. If you take the upper route, that's the trick. There we go. All right, we've gotten to the other end. And now we have another vague reference to Haitian Loa, I think they're called, Egeril. And do you recall what the underlying...
the original name is Erzily.
Erzily, okay.
And I banged the consonants around.
And
but the imagery is the bleeding heart, right? So this is a bleeding heart in some sense.
And you're pretty, that's a very representational there. So again, I see in this case, it looks like both branches are changing. So I'm going to favor the closed branches, I think. That one should open, and then that one should open, I think. And I think this concludes the trees, if I'm not mistaken. Right, and so here, this is again another wrinkle or improvement, complexity that the Fool's Errand games don't have. We now have people that are starting to give us items. They're fairly simple. We're not going to have, Monkey Island style, use rubber band on stick to make slingshot sorts of things. But there are some items here that function largely like keys. So we now have 100 kilobytes of data, I believe. And you can see that I'm holding the memory block here. I have a certain amount free. We'll go on to the next puzzle. And now we get the shareware warning, which in this version of the game is basically disabled, saying, pass it on. Oh, and there is another tree. Before we go down this tree, I want to jump back to the river, because if you'll recall, we can actually click on the river now and take some random data, and it is in our memory block. What's it going to do? I don't know, but surely we'll need it for something.
I always felt like I hadn't done enough with the inventory. Like, there's lots of puzzles, but there aren't that many opportunities to mess around with picking things up and putting them down. And I thought that was a flaw in the design. I could have gone farther with that.
4AM says that, as he recalls, there was also a fair amount of pushback against custom UIs. It's not Mac-like was a negative review.
Especially people who were making replacements, like games that had save and load interfaces that were clunky and ugly and did not use the standard Mac dialogues. That was a big hit, because you're doing something the OS can do perfectly well, and the player has no reason to need a different way to save a file.
Right.
It's different if you've got in-game interfaces where you're looking at game items and moving them around.
Oh, I think I just lost this one.
Yeah. I don't remember the rule on this one.
This one looks like it's another one where it's both branches flip.
Right, but the flipping extends more than one node.
Oh,
you flip 2 nodes away, see, I think.
Not in this one. It does not look like it is.
I might be wrong.
Now, if I go up one more, then even if those flip, I'm hosed. So I've got to find the right place to hop off the train here. If I go there, that'll flip, so that'll strand me. That's a dead end. So clearly it's one of these. I'm sure that I'm repeating myself here. That'll bring me down. There we go. I think I found it. Up, then down. Is this the one where I need help? No, I think it's the one after this that I need help. So, click. Yes, so now this is the one that you were talking about where it's flipping 2 away. And I can already see that I've lost that one, so it's not that way. And I am definitely brute forcing these trees somewhat. But, it's nice, kind of, that the puzzle is amenable to that. For someone foolish like me, it makes it a little easier.
There's interesting disparities in game design between the kind of puzzle that really makes you think about your options and the kind of puzzle you can sort of bang around the edges and get a haptic feel for how it's arranged. Mm-hmm. And I really, really prefer the kind of puzzle where you can get a sense of the elbow room of it. Mm-hmm. I really get the sense of I solve puzzles by banging into walls. And if there's a kind of puzzle which doesn't allow you to do that, I lose interest very quickly.
Well, let's take a minute to talk not about Systems Twilight, but about this idea of difficulty in games. This is something I know. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've had many conversations about this. You think very deeply about it. We both come from a world where we played a lot of text adventure games that were of the sort where, you eat a sandwich on turn 4 of the game, and the game is unwinnable now, and it does not tell you that you have eaten the valuable sandwich that you're going to need on turn 4,000. And you, in fact, came up with a scale, the Zarfian cruelty scale. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Which is not difficulty. That's you've changed subject. Right. Difficulty is not the same thing.
Fairness?
Well, it's not even fairness. A puzzle is only unfair if it violates your expectations. And when we played those text adventures back in the early 80s, everyone expected that you were going to have to try over and over and restart and figure out what was needed there and replan your run through the game. That was expected. We knew how to play that. Mm-hmm. So the fact that the game required you to do that was fair. It was harsh. It was mean, even in some cases, because it was very easy to have puzzles where you didn't realize there was another solution, and so you didn't know to look for it.
Right. But very specifically...
But we knew what kind of game it was. But learning by death, we say on the stream. And you see that in miniature in this game. You can get to a dead end in a single puzzle and have to restart. So in a sense, that is learning by death. But it's the kind of puzzle where you know that's going to happen. Now, right, but the question of whether people...
There's a scope question, right? Like, to restart a puzzle, that's fine. I think most people would say, I got to restart the puzzle, right? To restart the entire game, right? If you've been playing for 20 hours and you didn't know, that to me that's the crux. If I eat the sandwich and the game tells me, you're really going to regret that later, man, and I keep going, that's on me. Right, not the game, but it is cruel for that to be a silent.
I don't think so. I think, given the context of the early '80s, I don't think it was. Okay.
We can.
This was a genre that was a genre that started out with a game where you had a lantern and the lantern had 600 turns of light, and if you ran out and didn't know how to get more batteries, you died, and you said, "Whoops, I'm going to have to redo this again." And be more mindful of my lantern. Mm-hmm. But, that was how you played. And the fact that intentions, player understanding has shifted over the past, 40 years is merely something we have to keep in mind as retro game players.
Let's... I want to continue on this subject, but I also want to call out, this is the one where you actually do kind of give an oblique hint. You may need some assistance, and I think... I thought that if you clicked on the U character. He actually said something, but apparently I'm confusing that with 3 and 3. The you may need some assistance is the clue that you got to come back to this later after you get an item. So you actually made a couple of games that were, I think, intended to be onboarding experiences for text adventures for people who had, or interactive fiction, for people who hadn't played a lot of them or experienced a lot of them. And the one that I think more people have heard of because it was a very successful Kickstarter was Hadean Lands, which is a superb game. What?
That was in no sense intended to be an onboarding experience. That was for fans.
I mean, maybe not an onboarding experience, but there are things you did in that game that I would call user interface that made that game exactly amenable to what you're talking about. The yes, you're going to need to bang around. Yes, you're going to need to get to the dead end, but I'm going to make it so that the dead end is not as painful. In particular, for those of you who have not played Hadean Lands, there are puzzles you have to solve along the way, maybe by mixing an alchemical solution of this, that, and the other, and doing this ritual. But then once you've done it once, the parser allows you to say, do the thing that I already did. And it fast forwards past all the steps. The one that I wanted to call back to is the Dreamhold, which was a game that my sense is that even people who know your games, maybe this one has slipped under the radar. People know you for Spider and Web. They know you for So Far. They know you for Hadean Lands. And I feel like the Dreamhold to me is yes, it's an introductory game. It's a great story. It's a great game. I'm extremely enthused about it. Am I misreading the kind of tea leaves, pardon the pun, of who played and how many people played that game?
It's hard to say. Any game that you put up on your website for free, you never know who's playing it. Amid text adventure fans, they like the more, experimental narrative stuff that I've done, like the Spider and Web, or the more puzzle heavy stuff like Hadean Lands. So Dreamhold was not something that got hugely talked about, but everybody was aware of it at the time. I was pretty happy with its reception.
I have a strange question. Maybe it's strange, maybe it's not. Were you hoping with this game, and something you said about the fact that you have experimental games, some of your games, I would say are not puzzle games, right? Some of them are, and I'm thinking very specifically of Shade, probably So Far, probably some others that I haven't played them all, I'm sure, where you're really primarily interested in an emotional effect. That's the point of the game. And to me, the point of Shade is all about emotion. Maybe, arguably, the space under the window, possibly in that world too. Were you aiming for an emotional impact of any sort in this game? Or was it really strictly puzzles?
In Systems Twilight, yes. So there's puzzles that show up farther in, which are narrative based, right? There's puzzles where you read a story and then there's some kind of essentially a quiz, but getting into the idea of the story and what I'd put in. And I meant all of that to be narratively cohesive. I meant to have a feeling going through the game of an inexperienced character going on a journey and encountering strange adults that give them strange things to do, and coming to more of an understanding of what's going on, what the world needs of you as a protagonist, and in the end doing something, interesting and different and triumphant and coming to a finish. It's not a pure emotional focused journey like Shade is. It's basically puzzled, and you're going to spend a lot of your time thinking about the puzzles rather than thinking about the story. But certainly I meant to have a tone that runs through the game.
We are coming up on about an hour, and I did set this kind of arbitrary limit for this Let's Play, which I've mostly been talking to you and not playing, and frankly, I don't regret that. So I will commit to people watching that I will do more of the Let's Play without the conversation sometime in the future. But I wanted to take 5 minutes and give you a chance to talk about or plug some of the things you've been doing lately, such as your foundation, the foundation, I should say. Can you give me the name again?
My mind has gone blank, and I have no idea what you're talking about.
So
the Interactive Fiction Technology Foundation is a nonprofit, which is we have formed in order to support the causes of interactive fiction and also services like the Forum, the annual interactive fiction competition, IFDB, which is like IMDb for interactive fiction, and our upcoming conference, which is the fourth conference that we've run, the second in-person conference. We'll be holding Narroscope live in person in Pittsburgh in June. Registration should be opening early March, assuming we get all the prices and stuff now down.
I'm really not a conference person, but I'm going.
Well, you should. It's in Pittsburgh. We've been talking about going to school at Carnegie Mellon back in the early 90s, and it's not my hometown, but I've spent a lot of years in Pittsburgh, and I love it. And I'm excited to be visiting again. And it so happens that one of my conference co-organizers is now an instructor at U of Pitt. So Justin got us the venue, and we're talking to some CMU people about some co-programming and maybe some workshops. But anyway, the whole point is to have all the people that I know in interactive fiction and narrative game design come together and hang out and shoot the shit for a weekend. The first time we did it at MIT was just tremendously invigorating. Hopefully we're now far enough along in the pandemic that we can get together with suitable precautions and do it again in person, which I really want to do.
I have two other Andy stories that they're not embarrassing, I promise. One of them I'm sure is interesting or could be interesting to people. The other might not be, and so I'll allude to it, and you can decide if you think that story is interesting or not. The first one was one of the first games I'd ever played of yours. Was something you had done in the Andrew file system, and I cannot for the life of me remember the name of it. It started with an H, I think.
Praeser 5. Praeser Maze 5.
Praeser Maze 5. And so you need to know a little bit about Unix. Unix, of course, has file permissions. Well, the Andrew file system had a richer set of file permissions, relais du quoi. So you could read, list, insert, delete. So you could potentially delete a file from a directory that you couldn't read, or you could have directories that were Dropboxes. So it had very rich semantics. And so this was a game that you basically made in the file system, where to find the solutions, you basically, there were file names and you couldn't see the file names. You had to guess the file name more or less based on some clue. This might be the hardest game of every game you've made. I got absolutely nowhere with it. And then later you released, or someone released, I assume it was you, released a Z Machine version of this.
Yes.
That when I, found a walkthrough and got some hints as to because I couldn't even get started in that game. And then once I got through that kind of first set of puzzles with help, I had two thoughts. One was, oh, I see, this is how he's thinking. And two is, it's not fair. I never would have thought of that in a million years. So was there anything you want to tell us about Praeser Maze that's, interesting to you from your perspective? People's reactions to it?
It was an early idea of many of the same concepts that went into Systems Twilight. It had the little narrative things in a computery context. It had the characters existing in a computer world, in that case, literally a file system world. It was constructed out of what I had available in the same way that Fool's Errand was constructed out of the Macintosh UI that Cliff Johnson had available. And it was just a set of puzzles, a set of word puzzles. I wasn't particularly experienced with writing word puzzles. That's why it was difficult. But it was fun, and it drew on the concept of the text adventure, typing words into an interface, in a simple enough way that porting it to Inform 5 and making a Z Machine version was pretty simple. So I did that, and now it is available on my website, as my other games are. The other funny thing was the reason it was called Praiser 5. I had this series of puzzles that I had done since I was a kid, just because I had once had a dream of like running around in a 3D maze world, which was called for some reason Praiser Maze, which made no sense, but it was a dream. It didn't have to make sense. And later when I was drawing up puzzles, I started to name some of them after that word just because, hey, it's something from my history, it's something from my consciousness, had a little bit of symbolism to me. And one of the puzzles that I had drawn was just a graph paper like gate and lock and key puzzle, which made it into Systems Twilight. It's one of the ball and lock puzzles was originally Praiser 3 or 4, I forget which, but one of them. So there is actual continuity there.
One of the other story that I was alluding to was there was some discussion about Carnegie Mellon's new student center. It was new at the time. You know what I'm referring to. Do you want to tell it? Is that story interesting enough to tell, or?
I don't think it's very interesting, mostly because it didn't actually happen.
Okay, all right, then we can skip it. I have one other topic that I wanna broach with you, and I'm sure that this is the sort of thing that might be discussed at, for example, the Narrowscope conference. When I think of the world of people who play text adventures. Yes, you and I are still. I'm sorry. I know it's not. I'm old, so I'm going to call them text adventures, even though interactive fiction is a much better name. We were sitting at computers looking for something to do with it, and what we were doing with the computers, if it's a TRS-80 Model 1 or an Apple II, was probably typing and reading. And I've had the experience of introducing, young cousins and stuff to interactive fiction, and just getting this reaction of, what do you want me to do with this buggy whip, right? So obviously there are people for whom this still resonates. There are still people who join in to find this hobby, vocation, whatever you want to call it, and experience them, but it feels to me like fewer. And is there any addressing that? Is it just that this is the reality of there are more options open to people now, and that's the way it's going to be?
There was a definite moment in which, if your first computer was an Apple II or a TRS-80 or even a PET, you came home, your parents came home with a machine and dropped it down, and you fired it up, and you're at a basic prompt. And the first thing you type after being confused is and print hello, right. 20 go to 10. And you've done something creative with the machine. And that had a huge effect on a very narrow cohort of people who are now exactly our age. People who grew up with Windows 95 or even Windows 3.1, it was a different world, and that tool wasn't quite there. And since then, I mean, it's easy to be grumpy about it and pretend that that's disappeared forever, but of course there's been multiple iterations of that. Everyone now has a web browser, and you can immediately start writing an HTML page and put in some JavaScript and make something happen on your screen. There have been attempts like processing. There are innumerable websites. I mean, even people have done entire shows on whether Roblox is good or bad, but Roblox is an environment where you can whip up some scripts in something which is a simplified version of a game development environment and see results happen. And kids absolutely get into that. Minecraft, all these things. So there's never really been a computer world where you couldn't do that in some form. And it's gotten harder and easier, and it's gotten messier, and it's gotten, more or less ad-laden or more or less exploitative. And you can have a lot of discussions about that. But I don't think it's gone away.
Well, that's, good. Gives me a little bit of optimism
right.
that there are at least some people who will continue to. I mean, people have played puzzle games probably since speech developed and probably before. And I'm sure it will continue far into the future. Andrew Plotkin, you've been very generous with your time. I wanted to thank you for this hour. It's been a true pleasure seeing you again. And I look forward to seeing you at Narrascope in what month was it again?
That will be June 9 through 9 through 11.
Well, we'll see you in Pittsburgh, and I'll take you for some sort of horrible
here.
Food with fries all over it. And,
yeah. Well, O's is still open, right? We can go to the O's?
It is not. It is closed.
I'm aware of that. I was kidding.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, it's been good here to talk to you, and I will see you in some future session, possibly with the nuclear war construction set.
Possibly with the nuclear war. If you have the
nerve.
I absolutely have the nerve to talk about the nuclear war construction set with you. For those of you who joined us on the live stream, or those of you who caught up with this later, thanks so much for watching. This has been Gaming Like It's 1994.